Meghan Markle and divorce in the royal family explained. As the political relevance of the British royal throne diminishes, the spectacle surrounding each royal wedding grows. From Charles and Diana to William and Kate, and now Harry and Meghan. The world is captivated by these nuptials in a way that few other events can manage. 23 million Americans watched the last royal wedding, compared to the 17 million who watched Prince Charles marry Diana, or the 3.65 million who watched Charles marry Camilla. Sure, that's far less than the 103 million Americans who watched the 2018 Super Bowl, but more than double the amount who tuned in to watch ABC's American Idol reboot. But all things considered, the marriage of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is different from the rest, because with this union, the royal family officially enters the modern era. In no other time could an American person of colour, who's also a Catholic divorcée, be so openly welcomed into the royal family. The biggest hang-up here is divorce. Far less taboo outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, divorce is just one of those things that the throne was reluctant to embrace. Until about 20 years ago, a member of the royal family could not marry someone if they were divorced and their former spouse was still alive. That led to a few grim chapters in history, and we'll get to that in a moment. As for Miss Markle though, her ex-husband, television producer Trevor Engelson, is very much alive and well. So again, a mere 2 decades ago, Harry and Meghan's love would be more Romeo and Juliet than Cinderella.
What?
Now, to address those grim chapters in history, we have to go back to the mid-16th century. That whole "you shall not marry a divorced person whose ex-spouse is still alive" thing? It became a thing because King Henry VIII, a notorious philanderer, needed to legitimize his many marriages in pursuit of a male heir to the throne. Catherine of Aragon, a Catholic, couldn't provide this service to the king, and after Pope Clement VII refused to annul the marriage, because divorce wasn't a thing back then, King Henry did what any king would do and started his own church. Enter the Church of England and the English Reformation, also he could officially have children with his former mistress Anne Boleyn. That is, until they couldn't have kids. So naturally, Henry had her beheaded, which set off a series of events to the tune of marrying wife number 3, which lasted more than a year, but ended with her death just 2 weeks after giving birth to her son and Henry's only male heir, Edward VI. Marrying wife number 4, then annulling the marriage because, well, she wasn't up to his standards, marrying wife number 5, beheading her, and marrying wife number 6 before finally dying himself. Talk about a moral hazard. Henry VIII found every reason to get rid of his wives if they weren't serving a higher purpose, but his favourite was an accusation of adultery. This is perhaps the earliest instance of the pot calling the kettle black. This landmark decision by King Henry to start a new and found a church set off centuries worth of unfortunate unions, encapsulating in affair-riddled, arranged, and at times incestuous marriages. Fast forward to the Roaring Twenties, a time of overindulgence, flappers, and prosperity, and the romances of the monarchy mirrored this anarchy. But divorce was still beyond the pale. King Edward VIII's unrelenting love of American socialite Wallis Simpson proved to be a minor scandal in and of itself. But to make things significantly worse, Simpson was twice divorced. The 20s and 30s were times of transition, but the hidebound British establishment was loath to make a concession of this magnitude and accept an American divorcee as a Windsor. Edward had barely taken the throne when he was pressured to abdicate, that is, if his desire to love overcame his desire to rule. Edward felt strongly enough about Wallis that he felt he could not fulfill his duties without the support of the, quote, woman I love. True love may have won out in this case, if you turn a blind eye to the various unconfirmed rumours of infidelity by Wallis. Exhausted by the Second World War and stripped of its colonies, the 1950s were a different time in London, and it was Princess Margaret who was a true reflection of this change. Margaret fell in love with a former war captain and divorcee Peter Townsend, whom she intended to wed. However, her sister, who happened to be Queen of England, declared their romance unfit for the Windsor family. It's important to note that Townsend's ex-wife was still alive at the time. Overall, the 1950s were a tough period for the British monarchy, as various members of the Labour Party sought to cut funding for the Crown, while the tabloids continued to run headlines capturing royal family members in scandal. The Queen simply refused to let her sister become one of those headlines. But if the 50s were bad, the 90s were worse. Elizabeth's daughter, Princess Anne, went through a brutal divorce, and Elizabeth's son, Andrew, and daughter-in-law, Fergie, had their dirty laundry exposed to the masses, as photos of a partially clothed Fergie and a man, who was not her husband, made the tabloids. But nothing compared to Charles and Diana. When the tell-all Diana Her True Story was published, it shocked even the gutter press. The marriage of the century had unravelled like a cheap suit, and it became apparent that Charles had never stopped loving and sleeping with the woman he had always loved, the married Camilla Parker Bowles. It appears Diana never truly won Charles's heart, but the love for the people's princess was very real, and Charles's divorce from Diana played out in public so brutally that the royal family was forced to rethink its stance on the matter. In 2002, the Church of England finally sanctioned divorce in royal marriages. It had taken 5 centuries, numerous beheadings, and countless broken hearts for the British monarchy to implement this change. In 2005, Charles finally got his wish, marrying Camilla Parker Bowles. And that brings us to Meghan Markle, who will join the royal family with just as much spectacle but far less drama than her predecessors. With no pressure to provide an heir to the throne, no mistress-in-waiting, and the shame of divorce vanquished, Meghan's marriage to Prince Harry ushers in a new era of royal weddings.